Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me. I grew up in London, England, and both my parents were wonderful followers of Jesus, and so I grew up in that environment and was very grateful for the heritage. But of course, like anyone, there came a point as a teenager where I had to make a decision for myself. And in England, we have things called boarding schools where you actually go and live there. And I was at a boarding school that the general atmosphere was very hostile to Christianity. So it was no good me saying, oh, I'm a Christian because Mummy and Daddy are. You got killed for that. So I had to make a decision for myself, and I did, probably age 14, 15, or whatever, and never regretted it.
Wonderful. Well, I have fond memories of England. I lived there in the UK for 6 months and attended an Anglican church in Nottingham and met Canon J. John, who was a well-known evangelist in the UK.
Indeed.
Yeah.
He's a great friend of ours.
Yes. So I've got very fond memories of that, and I can picture you at your boarding school as a young boy coming to Christ. It's a wonderful start to your faith journey. Let's talk a bit about the next step for you. Like, what did you do after school? What did you study? What was your early career like?
My father was a doctor. And ever since, from the moment where I no longer wanted to be an engine driver or a fire officer, all I wanted to do, age 6 or 7, was medicine and follow him. And I did that and was all set to go to medical school at the end of my secondary education. For a variety of circumstances, I switched, and I decided I wanted to go into the business of what we call pastoral ministry. That is, leading and participating and serving in churches. So I, with a rather bad science qualifications, I managed to persuade a university in Scotland to take me to study theology, which I did. And at the same time, I joined the Royal Air Force Voluntary Reserve and learned to fly an aeroplane at Her Majesty's expense. And from there, I went to in Cambridge, which is what we would call a theological college, a sort of vicar factory, and went on from there. So it was a switch. Having been set on medicine, I then switched, and again, never regretted it for a moment.
And I enjoyed hearing you speak at a conference recently alongside your beautiful wife, Eleanor. Tell us how you met her.
Well, we both met at the University of St Andrews, where we were students. I was sharing a rather grubby, damp basement flat with 2 other friends from England. And sadly, one of them was his father suddenly dropped dead. I think it was in Phil's second year. And so as a result of that, Phil inherited a large estate of land in Dorset, which is in the south of the country, and a title. So of course, he instantly became rather eligible. And lots of people, and I assumed that Eleanor, for the first 2 years we knew each other, I assumed Eleanor was going to marry Phil. And we just became friends, as you would, because I later discovered that was never on the cards and never a possibility. So we became friends, and then we fell in love, and we waited 3 or 4 years because we were working in opposite ends of the country, and then we started together working in what we call a parish, that is a Church of England church in the West Country.
Wonderful. And then I know you had 2 sons, one of which became a very well-known musician, the lead singer of the band Mumford and Sons, Marcus. Tell us what it's like having a world-famous musician as a son.
Well, I mean, it's delightful. You know how, as a father yourself, you know how these things work. As your children grow up, you love them and are proud of them from day one, and you want them to do what God's called them to do. I mean, I don't think anybody was more surprised when he was at university studying Latin and Greek, both of which he loves and still reads. But for a variety of reasons, that didn't really work. So he decided he was going to go in this direction, and he's done it. He worked very hard. I don't think. I'm glad to say that he has held on to the values and the convictions that we've all shared together. And if he were here now, he would say, "This is what I think God's called me to do at this part of my life." He's married and has 2 wonderful children. So it works hard. It's a strange world. I don't know very much about it, except what I hear from him. But because it's just a strange world in the sense it's strange to me. It's totally outside my ken. But he loves it, and he has many friends. And there is a creative streak in him. So, he's at this point in his life, he's just released his first solo album, and so he moves ahead. And his wife, Carrie, is an actor, so they juggle their 2 careers. This, I think, very successfully.
Well, I am a massive fan, and if people do want to search up Mumford & Sons Amazing Grace on YouTube, it's one of the best live versions of Amazing Grace I've seen. It's absolutely brilliant. And I'm also excited to see Marcus has released his solo album. And there's a song called Cannibal on there, which is actually directed by Steven Spielberg. Incredible. So great to see your son reaching the world with his music. He's certainly an inspiration. Now, let's move on to a bit more of your Vineyard background. So I was a part of a Vineyard church for a number of years. I heard you speak at a Vineyard conference recently. Absolutely loved hearing your story. It all changed when you met this crazy American named John Wimber many years ago. Tell us how your life changed after being an Anglican vicar for many years, and then John Wimber walks into your life.
We worked Ellen and I worked for 10 years as you say, in the Church of England. My parents were part of that. My cousin was a senior bishop in the Church of England, and I loved it. Loved every minute of it, and indeed, some of our closest friends on the planet are still ministering in the Church of England, and so in that sense, no rift. But to my great surprise, God started to speak to us about joining this crowd of a new church movement that was developing. It was originally started in California, but it's developing around the world. And as you rightly say, it's led by a man called John Wimber, who's a wonderful leader, humble, not at all the sort of stereotype that sometimes people experience of church leaders, particularly in California. But he was, as I say, he was humble, he was gracious, he had a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. And he was God used him in particular ways in making Christianity and discipleship and following Jesus very acceptable or accessible, that's the word I'm looking for, very accessible to people. And we just became friends, and then we felt that God was beginning to speak to us about joining this particular group, and which is what we ended up doing. I don't think ever did we feel that it was better than anybody else, or more spiritual, or indeed less spiritual. It was simply that we felt for us this was what God was requiring of us.
And I understand that when you were leading, your church many years ago, you also had a guy named Brian Dirksen in
Indeed.
your church leading worship. I've interviewed Brian before, one of my favourite songwriters. Think of songs like Come Now Is the Time to Worship, Refiner's Fire, I think, all these beautiful songs.
Yes.
What was it like having him as your worship leader?
It was a delight. At the time, we were leading a church in near the centre of London, and at the same time, we were also leading the cluster of churches, vineyard churches, the growing number of vineyard churches in the United Kingdom. And he'd done one job, and he was sort of between jobs, and we connected. And he ended up coming over for 2 years to help us develop worship and worship leaders in the UK. And he came over with his whole family. And part of his time was doing it in the church, and part of it was with the rest of the Vineyard family and churches in the country. And again, the most delightful guy, very, very gifted, of course, very creative, but just very humble, full of integrity. I mean, it was just a delight, honestly, a delight to work with him.
Well,
he was in great demand because everybody around Europe wanted a piece of him.
Oh, yeah, certainly love his music, and many people would have sung his songs and many other great vineyard songs in their churches over the years. It's been something that has really blessed the body of Christ, the incredible music. But the other focus for the Vineyard has been church planting around the world, and you've had the privilege of visiting many vineyard churches around the world. Here in Australia, there's many all around Australia. Tell us about some of the other nations you've travelled to and ministered in the vineyard churches.
They are, but I mean, churches are popping up like vineyard churches are popping up like mushrooms, and I have to say we've always felt very, very strongly that, as I think I said earlier, we're not the best or the brightest, but we love the whole body of Christ. So we have lots of friends and fellow leaders and believers who are in the Catholic Church or the Baptist Church or the Pentecostal Church or the Salvation Army. So it's in the context of all of that we do what we do, and we plant churches. There are currently 16 nations now around the world where they have an established vineyard presence, an established vineyard family in the nation. So recently we went to Brazil, for example, and we were invited. There are a lot of churches up in the north, is of course the Amazon River. No, the river Xingu is a tributary of the Amazon, and there are no roads there at the moment, so everything is done on the river with boats, and churches and houses are on stilts. And we went and visited them. We had the most it's extraordinary how when you meet fellow believers, there's a real sense of family, though you don't know them at all, not met them before, and indeed probably in this case we don't speak Portuguese, so we had to have a translator. But even so, we went up the river. I mean, the river traffic is very hot, so you during the evenings, the nights, you sleep on hammocks, or just keep the clothes on and sleep on hammocks, and then you eat as you go. In other words, you fish as you go, and the particular fish in that part of the world is the piranha. With vicious teeth. So we would have sort of sweet and sour piranha for lunch. It was absolutely delicious, but you want to keep well away from the teeth. They are like razor blades.
Wonderful. Well,
we ate piranhas rather than the other way around, you'll be glad to hear.
Well, it's so good to hear of the vineyard churches popping up like mushrooms around the world. It is inspirational. And one more quick story before we wrap up. I heard your wife sharing that Justin Welby spoke at a vineyard gathering in the UK. Now, many would know him as the Archbishop of Canterbury, who preached at the Queen's funeral. 5.1 billion people heard the gospel because of his short sermon in that funeral. And he gave some advice to the vineyard leaders. He said, number one, always be sharing your faith. Every vineyard member should be able to share their faith in about 2 minutes. And I think the second one was always be led by the Spirit. Was that the two things that he said?
That's exactly right. Mm. He's a great friend, and he loves us, and we love him. And it was a huge honour when he was literally moving down from where he lived in the north of England to become Archbishop of Canterbury. And literally moving down with the lorries, and we were at a conference, and we got him to stop off. People will never forget that. Mm. It was a great blessing.
Well, it's been awesome to hear a bit of your story today, John. And if people want to find out more, they can search up Vineyard churches around the world. They're all around Australia, all around the world. And, of course, they've got lots of great worship music still pumping out. And they're an inspirational movement. And we are really blessed to be able to connect with you, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.